Hello Internet, today we're building the ultimate all-Intel budget PC. Silent, sleek, 0 RGB and under 600 quid. We're hunting parts on eBay, Amazon and Scan Computers to get the best deals. Some parts are pre-loved, others are brand new. But all of them are ready to get the job done. Right, so let's run through the parts for this build. Starting with the CPU. We've got the Intel i5-10400F. It's still a great budget chip and you can pick one up on eBay for around 50 quid used. Keeping that cool is the Thermalright Assassin King 120 SE, which came in at about 20 quid from Amazon. A solid budget cooler that should handle this CPU no problem. However, we could have saved a bit here by using the cooler that came with the CPU. But remember, this is a studio build, so it being silent is key. For the motherboard I'm using a Gigabyte H510, a micro-ATX board with the EVGA 1200 socket, which cost £75 from Scan Computers. Now for the case. I wanted something actually that looks quite good. So I went with the Lian Li A3 micro-ATX case. That was 75 quid from Scan also. Now RAM prices are a bit painful at the moment, but for memory I've gone with 16 gig of Kingston Fury. That's two 8 gig sticks at 3600 MHz, which set me back about 70 quid used from eBay. Now, powering the whole system is an EVGA 750 GQ. It's an 80 plus gold rated semi-modular 750 watt power supply. I managed to grab that for just 40 quid from eBay. For storage we've got a 1TB Crucial P3 Plus. It's a Gen 4 NVMe drive from Amazon, and these have gone up a little bit lately because of the AI crisis. That I got for £140. And finally, for the graphics card I've gone for the ASRock Intel Arc A380. It's a 6GB low profile card, which is priced at £120, also from Amazon. So that's the complete parts list. I'll include all the relevant links in the description below. The total cost for today's build comes to £590. So I've got a tenner's change that I'll be using for a few pints later. The first game is Resident Evil Requeim, running at 1080p resolution with all the graphics settings turned down to their minimum. Motion blur is disabled and AMD FSR 3 is set to ultra performance, which means the game is internally rendered at 360p and then upscaled to 1080p. So let's talk about the Intel i5-10400F. This is a 10th generation Intel processor that launched in 2020, and I chose to use it today because it's still a very solid option for anyone building a budget PC. The CPU features 6 cores and 12 threads, with a base clock of 2.9 gig and a boost up to 4.3 gig, and it's very power efficient with a TDP of 65 watts. One important thing to note is that the 10400F does not include integrated graphics. That means you won't get any display output unless you install a dedicated graphics card. For most gamers though, that's not really a problem, since the GPU is usually part of the build anyway.
He's dead.
In Resident Evil Requiem, performance is surprisingly good. The game runs smoothly and that's what really matters. Honestly, I thought we'd only get about 30 FPS. But however, the result shows an average of 89 FPS with a 1% low of 44 and a 0.1% low of 31 FPS. Moving on now to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 at 1080p resolution, with the settings set to low and both depth of field and motion blur turned off. I have also enabled Intel XeSS on the quality preset, which means this time the game is rendered at around 720p. The Intel Arc A380 is Intel's entry-level card from the Arc Alchemist series. It was first released on June 14, 2022, starting with a launch in China before coming available in other regions later that year. At launch, the card had a recommended retail price of around £120, which is roughly about $150 in the US, making it very affordable. The A380 also comes with 6 gig of GDDR6 memory and uses Intel's Xe-HPG architecture. It features 8 Xe cores, 1024 shader units and supports DirectX 12 Ultimate, which includes features like hardware ray tracing, although I wouldn't recommend using that feature. The card is mainly designed for 1080p gaming, where it can run a good number of modern games at low settings, while still keeping decent performance. Overall, the Intel Arc A380 is designed as a budget graphics card for entry-level gaming and content creation. In Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, the performance is actually pretty solid. The frame time graph looks exactly how you'd want it to, nice and smooth without any big spikes. On average, this system managed about 53 FPS, with a 1% low of 43 and a 0.1% low of 39 FPS.
No problem.
Next up is Arc Raiders, at 1080p resolution with low settings, and with motion blur off. Also, AMD FSR2 is set to balanced, so this time the game has been rendered internally at about 640p. If you've been planning a PC build in 2026, you've probably noticed RAM prices. Recently, both DDR4 and DDR5 have risen sharply due to supply shortages. DRAM prices have increased to some seriously stupid levels, and shortages could continue way into 2027. Much of this is because manufacturers are prioritising high-margin server and AI memory, leaving less supply for consumers. However, budget and mid-range builders still have one relatively safe option, in the shape of 16GB DDR4. These kits remain in the entry-level tier, and so far haven't seen the same price hikes as larger capacities like the 32 and 64GB. Now, back to Arc Raiders, and performance here is actually looking quite solid. The game is running very smoothly overall, delivering an average of 56 FPS, with a 1% low of 42 and a 0.1% low of 20 FPS. Next is High on Life 2 at 1080p resolution and on low settings, with motion blur off and AMD FSR3 set to ultra performance, with this time AMD frame generation enabled. And honestly, it's about time we had a genuinely funny game. High on Life 2 was developed and published by Squash Games, released in February of 2026 for Xbox Series XS, PS5 and Windows. The game is a fast-paced comedy shooter that expands on the original's universe. Now, today's case, or chassis as it's often called in the UK, is the Lian Li A3. It's an mATX wood front mesh case. The design immediately stands out, giving it a clean look that fits nicely in creative or studio spaces. The wooden panel adds a warm, furniture-like feel. While the mesh improves airflow, the result is a case that looks stylish but remains practical, blending nicely with studio gear, speakers and music equipment rather than standing out like a great big gaming tower. Now, in High on Life 2, on these settings it manages an average of 50 FPS, with a 1% low of 34 and a 0.1% low of 26 FPS. The next game is Far Cry 6 at 1080p, low settings, motion blur off, and AMD FSR1 set to balanced. When I first tried gaming on the Intel Arc a little over a year ago, the experience honestly wasn't perfect. The drivers were still pretty new. Some games had compatibility issues, and performance could be a bit inconsistent. It felt like the platform was still in its early stages and figuring things out. But fast forward to today and things have improved quite a bit. Intel has released regular driver updates that have now improved compatibility, stability and overall gaming performance. Many of the issues from the early days have now been addressed, and a lot more games now run smoothly. In Far Cry 6 the average is 81 FPS, with a 1% low of 58 FPS and a 0.1% low of 23 FPS. Next up we've got The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, running at 1080p on the high graphics preset. I've turned depth of field and motion blur off, and I'm using AMD FSR2 set to balanced. So if you're thinking about building a small home server, a setup with an i5-10400F and an Intel Arc A380 actually makes a lot of sense. Servers usually run a lot of things at once. Background services, containers, maybe a few virtual machines, and those 12 threads help handle multitasking really well. The Intel Arc A380 is where things get interesting though. It's a budget GPU, and it supports modern video formats like AV1, HEVC and H.264, which makes it really useful for something like a Plex server. The GPU can handle hardware transcoding, basically converting video streams for different devices, instead of the CPU doing all the work. That makes streaming smoother and keeps the CPU usage low. So for things like a home media server, file storage, virtualization, or just experimenting with self-hosting services, this combination is actually a really sensible setup. Now, when it comes to performance in The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, we're seeing an average of 69 FPS with a 1% low of 54 and a 0.1% low of 42 FPS. Moving on to Fortnite at 1080p resolution using the low graphics preset, and with motion blur turned off, the game is using the DirectX 12 API and FXAA for anti-aliasing. Performance here is actually quite solid, which is pretty much what you'd expect from a system like this. With the Intel Core i5-10400F paired with the A380, it handles esports games extremely well. Titles like Valorant, Counter-Strike 2, Rocket League and League of Legends all run smoothly. Even something like Overwatch 2 runs well on this setup. You probably won't be cranking every visual option all the way up, but however, that's not really the goal of a system like this. In Fortnite, the average is 120 FPS, with a 1% low of 67 FPS and a 0.1% low of 16 FPS. The final game is Battlefield 6. At 1080p resolution with low graphics settings, depth of field and motion blur are disabled, and Intel XeSS is set to balanced. Performance averages 49 FPS, with a 1% low of 36 FPS and a 0.1% low of 23 FPS. So, after testing a bunch of games today, this little build actually turned out better than I expected. For a system built mostly from budget and second-hand parts, the combination of the Intel i5-10400F and the Intel Arc A380 holds up surprisingly well. Games are perfectly playable, but what makes this system interesting isn't just the gaming performance. This build is excellent for a small studio PC, or even a home server. The 6 cores and 12 threads of the i5 handle multitasking really well, and the A380's media features support codecs like AV1, making it great for video encoding or running something like a Plex server. Add in the clean, minimal look of the Lian Li A3 mATX Wood Edition case, and you end up with a system that doesn't scream gaming PC, which actually makes it a great fit for a recording setup. So, overall, if you're willing to hunt on eBay for a few used parts, it's still very possible to put together a capable PC for well under £600 in the UK. And honestly, for $590, that's not bad at all. Before I go, make sure to subscribe for more budget builds. Thank you for watching, I'm David James and I'll catch you in the next one.